are listening to The Story Points, a podcast where the worlds of product and engineering converge to delve into topics that resonate with us in our daily professional lives.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast episode, where we delve into the world of product, technical skills, and everything in between. I'm Niraj, your host for this season, and today I have my friend Prabhan, also known as PK, who has been into product space for a decade now. PK, has been quite a while since our last episode, hasn't it?
Thanks for having me, Niraj. Yes, it's been a year. I blame our poor scheduling for that. But now that we're back, we can focus on more of these sessions and more of these episodes and more conversations.
Absolutely. PK, it's great to be back on the mic. Today we are exploring demystifying product roles. How much tech do you need? We'll discuss the balance between business insight and technical know-how, and whether you really need to code to drive as a product professional. So you have mentioned you have been in the product discipline for over a decade now. Could you talk a bit about how you started and what got you interested into products in the first place?
Sure, Niraj. So my journey started when companies were beginning to adopt Agile in a big way. And over the years, the adoption of Agile became an endeavor where companies wanted to do Agile. And then now we are in a way where people want to be AI powered or integrate with AI and all of that stuff. So early on, I was curious about how products were built and how teams collaborated and how customer needs were translated into actionable product features. And that curiosity sort of got me further into this space.
AI, the buzzword nowadays, but that's quite a journey. You once told me initially felt a barrier when it came to technical knowledge. Can you talk more on that?
Mhm. So when this thing interested me, the whole product space, I began sort of looking on different ways of getting into this particular domain. And when I started looking at job descriptions, I always felt that there was a very heavy emphasis on technical background, coding background. You have to know this particular, you must have coded for X number of years, you must have uh, worked in a specific domain for at least N number of years, so on and so forth. So it created this perception that you had to be a software engineer or very deeply technical to be an effective product manager or a product guy. I even tried learning how to code,
I remember.
but I wasn't very successful. And at one point, and at that point, actually, it made me question whether I even belonged here, right? So, yeah, that was how I felt like there was a barrier.
It's common, especially in India. I see product roles job postings stating a preference for coding or domain expertise. In your experience, do you think coding or strong technical expertise is absolutely necessary?
No, in my opinion, it's not. I see that these requirements serve as filters to various companies for them to eliminate people, just taking into account the market that we are in as a nation, right? Or the labor market forces, as I might want to call it. So while a coding background can be helpful, what's truly required for a product role is basically three things, right? Number one, understand the implications of technical decisions on the product and, more importantly, on the user. Communicate effectively with the engineering team what needs to be built and what are the edge cases, how do you kind of account for that. And three, being able to clearly articulate the impact of these technical decisions or technical constraints to wider audience like marketing, sales, so on and so forth. Leadership, another good example. So you don't need to write code or, do elaborate design APIs as a requirement to do things effectively, is what I believe.
That's refreshing. As an engineering lead, I appreciate product folks who know enough to communicate effectively but don't necessarily try to do my job. So, if you were to summarize what sort of technical knowledge should a product person aim for, what would it be?
See, I think as an eventual state, if you have a fundamental understanding of key technical concepts like what are APIs, how do APIs enable products or systems, what is authentication, what are security basics, the importance of testing, what are the different types of testing, why should they be done, what do you mean by environments, why is it important to have a staging, and so on and so forth. The relationship between like front end, back end, what do you mean by that? Where does each of these uh, sort of domains have a boundary, right? And how the data is structured, how is it stored, rather than the deep technical knowledge of the various, uh, I don't know, like what example can I give you? So it's enough that I know that this is a REST API and this is a SOAP API and this is the fundamental difference. But I don't need to know specifically what engineering or what coding skills are required to kind of argue between which one is better than the other. If it gives you a sense of what I'm trying to say. So rather than focusing on getting the deep technical expertise, I think we should focus on grasping these building blocks so that we can facilitate these conversations better with the engineering audience, with business, and with the user at the end of the day.
I agree with you because when I talk to a product person and they also using the same terminologies, the discussions becomes really easy because there is no overhead of explaining what does REST mean or what does SOAP mean. But for the audience, could you give us a practical example on how this technical understanding helped you in real project? Maybe a situation where knowing these basics made a significant difference in your collaboration with the engineering team.
Sure. Um, so what comes to my mind is an example from about a couple of years ago where um and it was a very interesting uh, product that I was a part of. I'll give you some context to what the product was trying to do and how my involvement sort of happened. I am going to stick to the travel domain. So we had a itinerary planning system. So let's call it trip planner, right? For the sake of simplicity. Now this trip planner allowed the sales team to sell trips to families. Now trip planner integrated with an aggregator API to get room availability, pricing from suppliers. So who are suppliers? Like think of Taj as a supplier. So Taj will say, I have 200 rooms across Delhi and Agra for this aggregator, and aggregator will try and sell that particular 200 rooms of inventory. Now, for whatever reason, the aggregator that we had integrated with decided to shut shop. So this left us in a blind because the whole business depended on the trip planner getting an inventory of beds so that they can then sell it. So the business identified a new aggregator, which was great, but there was a significant challenge. Now, this trip planner was not something that we had built from scratch. It was owned by another company and we were using it. With this company was, I think, 20 years old or something, and this trip planner was also built on a relatively older sort of language, technical architecture, and all of that stuff. Now, because the trip planner's technology was quite old and the new aggregator that we identified was relatively newer in terms of the architecture and all of that, the company which owned trip planner said, hey, we can do the changes to integrate with this new aggregator, but we will need 18 months time at a bare minimum. And the company that said this is, we knew from our experience that when they say 18 months, it's probably 24 months, right? So this created a problem because the whole existence of the company was at stake, right? So what did we do? What we envisioned was a solution of a middle layer. So if you think about it from a product standpoint, this is quite a technical product because we don't have an end user to this product. So the product was, we will build a layer. This layer was the product. This layer would catch all the calls that was sent by trip planner, reroute it to this new aggregator, without having the need for this trip planner and the new aggregator to be integrated, right? So effectively, if I were to put it in sort of technical terms, this layer would intercept the API calls, transform them, translate them, and reroute them to this new aggregator that we were talking about, so that trip planner would still get the results without differentiating between the old aggregator and the new aggregator. Although the old aggregator was in a completely different architecture, completely different API implementation versus the new one.
And you also mentioned me before this session, what we are recording, that this new thing, what you were building, was also having a difference in protocol. Like the older one was using SOAP and the newer one was using REST.
Correct. That's right. So that was the technical sort of challenge here. So, like I said, trip planner was built around SOAP APIs. So it's an older API implementation, right? So, but the newer aggregator offered REST APIs. So we had to ensure that every time the trip planner made a call, we understood the older SOAP format, recalibrated them and transformed them into REST API calls, and then queried with the new aggregator, got the response back, again transformed that back into SOAP, and then sent the REST payload back to the trip planner. So this meant that we had to do this at every single point of the life cycle where the user would have to query for rooms, look for rooms, book rooms, cancel rooms, refund rooms, the entire life cycle. So that sort of made it um, a technical challenge and also a joy, because a good sort of challenge for me as a product guy to sort of work on this.
So
Now-
from
Yeah, go on.
so from a product perspective, what was your main responsibility?
When I entered this particular project or the product, when I entered the product, it was at a stage where we had thought of what the ideal solution would be, which is the API layer and all of that stuff, the layer in between. So my job when I entered or after I entered was to understand, okay, if the user is wanting to get a particular list of hotels in a particular parameter, what all does that call need? And how does that call translate from a SOAP to REST and vice versa? Right? So understand and create documentations for this data exchange. Of course, it was not something that I did all by myself, but I had to work with the engineering teams and all of that stuff. Then I had to help the development team and the new aggregator align on what the endpoint would be and what would it do, what would it be its job, what are the parameters, what's the payload, what is important at which stage of the life cycle. That, and also communicate any technical constraints to the stakeholders, because the stakeholders were also quite new to understanding this, because we are not talking about an interface, we're not talking about seeing anything in a screen which sort of made sense to a business leader, right? So I'll give you an example. Right now, the older aggregator had a certain way of providing us the details. So let us say the user interface in trip planner said search for hotels in Agra for a particular date. The old aggregator would say, here are the hotels, here are the rooms, here is the pricing. So all the payload, all the information came in one payload. Whereas a newer aggregator said, listen, when you ask for hotels, I will give you only the hotels. Then you have to ask, okay, sorry, not just the hotels, but it will also give you the rooms. Then we had to ask, okay, for this room, what is the price? Now, if you think about the implication of this technical constraint, the user would now have to make 3 CTAs on the interface, which is not possible, right? You cannot search for only the hotels first without knowing the price, then search for the price, and then tell your guest that this is what is the price. It has to be done in one single flow. So what we then did was we took this layer that we were building in between, we took the calls. We made 3 calls for every 1 call that happened from the trip planner, fetched the data, stored the data, cached the data, and then sent 1 call back to this new, not new, but the trip planner from the new aggregator. And yeah, I think that's the most sort of complex part, I would say, in this particular thing. Yeah.
Wow, listening to that, it sounds quite technical. You spoke about SOAP, REST, APIs, and also like how you're transforming the response into different types. Because I believe that SOAP is using XML and the rest will be using JSON. So tell me, you don't come from a traditional computer science background, do you?
No, not at all. I studied biochemistry, genetics, and biotechnology in university. And I immediately after my graduation worked with a investment banking company. And after a few years of working, I went on to study business administration. So I don't have any formal training in coding or system architecture or anything of that sort.
That's interesting because you started from biology, then finance, and now in tech industry with travel and the other domains you're working on. So how did you navigate those technical waters?
See, Niraj, I think I relied a lot on my curiosity and like the common sense to piece together things, right? Now, I didn't know how to write complex algorithms, but when you start um, mentally putting it all together, I think that made me ask a lot of questions. And sometimes it was right or not right, but sometimes you would feel like you asked a very stupid question. Or sometimes the other person feel this is a very stupid question, but nevertheless it was a question that I had, which was important for me in my mind to piece it all together. So um, this these questions help me understand what is the cause and effect and how changing one thing might change another output, so on and so forth. Um, so that's essentially what I did always.
Yeah, asking question is never stupid, but I understand sometimes you feel like that. But from my perspective as an engineering lead, working with a product person who can ask the right questions and frame the business context is invaluable. What advice do you have for product people who want to effectively collaborate with the engineering team?
Hmm. So a few tips, right? One is stay curious. Don't be afraid to ask why or how. In fact, a lot of times engineers will be very happy to explain what they know about how a technology works or how they're implementing a particular feature. They love to talk about it. The second thing is over a period of time, as you keep talking to developers, build your own vocabulary, which is the common language between you and the development teams, right? So things like what API, endpoints, payload, latency, cache memory, all of that stuff, right? That helps over a period of time. You connect with the development folks much better and much faster. Third, business context matters. So continuously remind the tech team why a particular feature or a particular bug is is impacting the grand scheme of things, because this helps everyone get onto the same page. Finally, a natural outcome of you having done the previous 3 steps is that you'll start building trust. Everyone will know what we are trying to do, why we are trying to do, and they will innately trust you. And that will help you get, better features, build better products in a good way, in a clean way. So yeah, those are my tips.
Yes, from the engineering team side, we appreciate product people, respect the complexity of the technical work, and don't push arbitrary deadlines without discussing feasibility. It's a two-way street, right? Uh, so PK, before we wrap up, any final thoughts or words of wisdom for aspiring product folks and who feel intimidated by the technical side of the role?
Well, like I said, curiosity, communication, empathy. I think these are the core to product management or product discipline. Technical knowledge you can learn over a period of time. It's not a prerequisite, in my opinion. You need to, as a product folk, you need to focus on why we are doing something and how does it help somebody, in this case, business and the users. That's pretty much it. And then over a period of time, you will kind of figure out the ropes of the discipline.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much for joining me, PK. It's been a pleasure revisiting our shared experiences and learning from your journey.
Thank you, Niraj. It's been a fantastic conversation. I hope our listeners find this helpful, apart from it being short and crisp.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. We hope you enjoy the deep dive into product space and technical skills. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us on our comment section. Until next time, this is Niraj signing off. Stay curious, stay collaborative, and keep building great products.